Hey guys, just so you know, your assignment is due on Monday tonight. If you're watching this when you're supposed to be, make sure you get that done. So use these notes to kind of go through it. I'm going to go through the different rules that are discussed in this assignment. So first rule, commas between items in a series. This should not be new information for you. So here, the first example, the street vendor sold watches, necklaces, and earrings. So we got the commas separating them. So this last one, that's called the Oxford comma. It's now considered optional, but a lot of times it won't make sense if you don't use it or the meaning becomes unclear or obscure. So I really suggest using that. And the grammar Nazi in me wants to make you use it. Owen peered into the hot, still smoking engine. So here you got a different kind of series. You have a comma separating these two adjectives. So if and could be put in the sentence right here and it still makes sense, that's when you use a comma for that. So Owen peered into the hot and still smoking engine makes sense. But if you look at the example at the bottom, Michael wore a pale green tuxedo. If you said Michael wore a pale and green tuxedo, it just doesn't sound right. So you wouldn't use a comma there. So that's just a little trick to help you remember that. Okay, so commas after introductory material. So here we're going to be talking mostly about dependent clauses. So the sentence that has the explanation in it. So muttering under his breath is a dependent clause. We have a comma separating it from the independent clause. Okay, so James reviewed the test material he had memorized is an independent clause. Muttering under his breath is dependent, so it needs to be set off by the comma. So looking at the next one, although he had been first in the checkout line, Dion allowed an elderly woman to go in front of him. So we have dependent clause, comma separating it from the independent clause. If the dependent clause comes after the independent clause, 99% of the time it does not need a comma. Alright, so then we have commas surrounding words and phrases that interrupt the flow of a sentence. So we've talked about this with the positive and participial phrases. So we got the vinyl car seat sticky from the heat clung to my skin. So this part is breaking up the flow of the sentence. So we have commas around it. If you took that out, the sentence would still make sense. The vinyl car seat clung to my skin. So that's when you know you're going to need commas around it. So that's a good trick to remember. Jake's gaming system, which his wife got him for his birthday, occupies all his spare time. Here's our extra information. Whoops, sorry, I went too far. Okay, which his wife got him for his birthday is that extra information. So that breaks up the flow of the sentence. So you don't need, or so you got to put commas around it. If the extra information is needed for clarity, a comma is not required. So here, Richard Adams' novel Watership Down is the most thrilling adventure story I've ever read. So this would be considered the extra information. But if you just said Richard Adams' novel is the most thrilling adventure story I've ever read, the reader wouldn't know what novel you're talking about. So Watership Down is then required for clarity in that sentence, so it does not require commas. Okay, this should not be new information for you. Commas and conjunctions to find complete thoughts. So last week on your digital notebook, you looked at semicolons to do this as well. That's what we're talking here. You got your independent clause, comma, and conjunction to combine them. Okay. If the two clauses are really short, the commas are considered optional. So just kind of play it by ear, I guess, but I just always use the comma just to be safe. Make sure you are not using a comma to separate two verbs that go with the same subject, because then you don't have two independent clauses and the rule doesn't apply. So if you have a compound verb, stared over his bifocals and lectured me, is a compound verb. Okay, so you don't need any commas there because of that. Commas with direct quotations. You guys have been practicing this with your writing. So So if the tagline comes at the end of the quotation, put your comma here. This is what I mean by tagline. If it comes before, you put the comma after it. Here's your tagline. And notice too, are capitals. If it comes in the middle, you got to figure out which kind of punctuation to use. So no matter what, you'll still put a comma here. But if this first part is a complete sentence and the second part is a complete sentence, then you need to put a period here instead of a comma. In that last example, this and this is part of the same complete thought. You got a dependent clause and independent clause. So notice you got a comma there and a comma there instead of the period like you do in that one above it. And then just some random rules. Use a comma anytime you're directly addressing someone. If you're the last to leave, Nicholas, please turn off the lights. Oops. We got a comma, the person we're addressing, and the comma. I think we're on the wrong road, Dylan. Same thing. Comma before the address of someone. If it's at the beginning of the sentence, it's the same thing. So you'd say like Dylan, comma, I think we're on the wrong road. Use a comma after a salutation in a letter. I think you know that. You probably know this last one, but maybe not. Using commas in numbers with four or more digits, except for years and street numbers. So like there's a year, for example, or like a zip code. You wouldn't use a comma. With quantity, you do. So just make sure you're paying attention to that. A lot of us have the tendency to just write 50,000 or 2,000, whatever. We have the tendency to just write it out like that. But make sure you add the comma in there. That was good. Okay, so, sorry, that's really bothering me. Okay. If you need any help with commas, just let me know. Make sure you get that assignment done tonight.